All praises to the Most High, giving the Most High honor and glory, all reverence unto Him. Greetings, family. Pray all is well. Okay, so on yesterday I shared a video from this brother, Asar, and I've given a little background about him. I want to say about 20 years ago, he was, in the lineup of understanding that we were the Hebrew Israelites. And from that, I want to say, moved spiritually into an area of Kemet out of the Hebrew Israelite. Is like as if, Father moved him into this lineup where he started studying the language of the Bantu tribes throughout Africa and also in Kemet, and correlating the two, where he learned the hieroglyphs and so forth. So he's presenting now in this part of the segment of the video. I really, want all to pay close attention. But our Bantu brothers and sisters out there who I know by tribes, we are ones have separate in a sense. They know at a deeper, place far as the roots go. Perhaps we all connected according to some may think or might understand, but it goes back deeper than that. So last year I heard the word Great Lakes, and I looked it up. And when I, hear words or places, I immediately say, to connect it with Africa. So I looked it up. There is an area in Africa called Great Lakes, and surrounding that area, which I understand is where a lot of like that would be the Congo basin, and there was a time the map that spread out, you know, that had Congo bigger than what you see on the map today. That it was a great landmass of Africa that said Congo. And then I heard the word Abyssinia. This was later on. I looked it up, and that's in Egypt, Kemet. And then I heard the word, it's out of actual Renaka. It's out of what you would call today, what's the country there? It's right above South Africa, and but it's in an area where our family, and I say family, our people, there was a brother that went there, and he just felt a peace there, and that was Robert, brother Robert Headley. And this was back years back. He was led there to work, and he was in this area. So the area was is Botswana. So I heard the word Renaka. So when I looked it up, Renaka is in Botswana. So those three areas that I've heard the name of, and I didn't understand why at the time. But today you're going to hear where Brother Asar is going to speak about a brother originally, or from the Congo. Now he lives, I want to say, in France, and but he have wrote a book and did his due diligence to connect the dots in so many ways. So I'm just want all to pay close attention. I don't know how long I'm going to play this, and I'll share the link, and you can see the complete video. But it lines up with Kemet It's as if our people left from an area surrounding the Great Lake and went into Kemet area. So it just that I wanted to point out. So let's listen in.
Brother Jean-Claude Emboli, a linguist and an electrical engineer out of the Republic Democratic of Congo, of a Zande and Songo background, and who currently resides in Toulouse, France. But he also teaches in Africa at a university there as well. So he kind of goes back and forth doing what he does. So he wrote a book, The Origin of African Languages, in French as well, building off of the template that Theophilo Benga created in 1993 with the work that we just saw in the previous slide. And so there were a number of mistakes that Theophilo Benga made. And so Jean-Claude Emboli, starting from scratch, ultimately reaffirmed um, Dr. Theophilo Benga, but with some major changes to his Negro Egyptian. And so, the Negro Egyptian that Emboli has concluded is broken up into two major branches, which he calls Bere and Beher. And so on the left hand side, you see the branches of Bere, and then you see on the right hand side the movement in the branches of Beher. And so what he argues is that, you know, what we're calling Negro Egyptian originates in the Great Lakes area, and that the pre Proto Bantu split up into two. And so pre Proto Bantu split up into Bantu proper that we know of today, and then what he calls Para Bantu, which split up into Middle Zande, the Hausa language, and Bambara. And so this is based on linguistic analysis. And again, I said earlier, it's a very nuanced, it's very detailed, it's very scientific, and you can't really do it justice in a single video conversation. But then, of course, on the other branch here is the Beher, which and these are the languages that he analyzed in his text. So the first six major, and so there's Coptic, Somali, Sango, Zerma, Wolof, and Luo, for example. And so, you know, just to give you an idea of the breakage of the languages according to the Emboli model. And so notice that Middle Egyptian and Coptic are two separate languages. And so what he argues is that the linguistic analysis demonstrates that Coptic was a different language altogether than Middle Egyptian, and that they both coexisted along the Nile. And more than likely, what we're calling Coptic was the everyday language of the people, while the Bere Middle Egyptian was the language of the elites who took over, who came from the south and conquered and united Upper and Lower Egypt. Excuse me. And so, but that's a discussion for another time. And so, some of y'all who, of course, know me should be familiar with Dr. Teofilo Benga. Excuse me, not Teofilo Benga, but Dr. Muba Benga Bilolo. And so, Dr. Muba Benga Bilolo is an Egyptologist, also a linguist and philosopher. Uh, Out of the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he is a native of the Baluba people who I spoke of earlier. And he's written a number of books. One that you see here, it says "Towards a Egyptian, Coptic, and Luba Dictionary." Um, the Bantuity of the vocabulary of Egyptian Coptic, and the essays of Lilius Homberger, if y'all don't know who Homberger is, and of course Dr. Theophilo Benga. And so he he comes up with this label China Into for essentially uh, all of the African languages that share affinities with Bantu. And I took that label because it's a I think it is a very good label based on linguistic grounds. And this is the design or the breakdown of the language family as articulated by Emboli. And so, without getting into the details of what this all means here, it was confusing because Emboli would call all of these different stages, these are stages here, as Negro Egyptian. And and for for clarity, I renamed the stages of his Negro Egyptian. So the the greater language family I call Chi and Kanda. So remember that word that I introduced earlier, Bukanda, for the label of Africa. So this is archaic Chi and Kanda, the archaic African language that gave birth to Chiankanda Chikulu. This is the most archaic stage. And then you have classic Chiankanda, and that's these stages right here. Then you have Chiana Intu. And then you have another split called Kabed. And the interaction of the Kabed branch and the Chiana Intu is what gives us Proto Semitic in the Levant. We don't have time to go into the details of that, but I just want to give you some insight on what I mean by Chiana Intu. So Chiana Intu is the stage here. And based upon the Lande of Middle Egyptian, of Coptic, of Sango, Somali, and even Proto Bantu is what we call, what I'm calling Chiana Intu. And what we discover is that when we reconstruct the parent language, the Proto Bantu is closest and actually mirrors the reconstruction. So this is how we know that Proto Bantu is older than these languages here. And we'll show we'll give an example of that a little later. And so just to reiterate, Shiana Intu is the parent language, the parent group, the Intu group that gives birth to the two branches that we talked about earlier, Bere and Beher. And so the Bere branch, Hassa, Zande, Middle Egyptian, and also Bantu, the modern Bantu. They're all Bantu languages. It's just that Proto Bantu and the Bantu that you find in the Central Africa keeps more of and builds on the ancestral into Chiana Intu language group that gave birth. The other languages go through a number of changes where they lost a lot of the features that the modern Bantus kept. So modern Bantu is is more resemblance of the ancestral Chiana Intu than all of the other languages and branches that we mentioned here. And so understand that when we're talking about Chiana Intu. And so now we get into the meat of our discussion. So that's just the preliminary. So now, when there's a famous Egyptologist out of Europe, Serge Sinura, or Sinura, and somebody who speaks French can help me pronounce that a lot better. Um, and he wrote a text called The Priest of Ancient Egypt, which you see here on the left. And in the Priest of Ancient Egypt text, he states the following: But for Egypt, the sea marks the limit of a world, of an African world. Thus, the dreams of Ogotomeli Let me stop here. He says, thus the dreams of Ogotameli. Ogotameli was a Dogon priest. There's a book in English uh, on Ogotameli, written by Marcel Griole, Marcel Griole, and uh, in this, Griole interviews this elder blind Dogon elder by the name of Ogotameli, and he breaks down Dogon religion and philosophy for him over, I think, a number of like 30 days or something like that. And so what he's saying here is that, but for Egypt, because beforehand he's talking about, European philosophy and what you find in the Middle East. And then he says, when it comes to Egypt, however, Egypt's different. But for Egypt, the sea marks the limit of a world. So that Mediterranean Sea, that Red Sea, that's the border. That's where the commonality stops in terms of these groups in the Middle East and in the Eurasian corridor, as he's trying to argue here. And so he says the sea marks the limit of a world, of an African world. Thus, the dreams of Ogotameli, or the Bantu philosophy, carry precious elements which help us to understand better certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. But we must expect to find little of Platonic thought, that means Greek thought, in this world. And so above is page 4 in the French version. In the English version is page 7 that you see this here. And so this is essential to understand here. And so what he's saying is that when we study Bantu philosophy, you can read a book by the same title by a priest by the name of Temples. Temples wrote a book on titled Bantu philosophy, and it's primarily centered on the Baluba people in the Democratic Republic as kind of an essential, group for understanding Bantu philosophy in general. And so when he's saying that Bantu philosophy carries the precious elements, why? Why would this Egyptologist, this European white Egyptologist, who is one of the top Egyptologists at the time, says when you study Bantu philosophy, it carries precious elements which helps us to understand better certain aspects of Egyptian religious thought. The reason why is because Bantu philosophy and ancient Egyptian philosophy belong to the same Into universe. This is brought out by the very linguistic analysis, and there's certain so-called mysteries that you can't even explain in Egyptian society without consulting Bantu languages and cultures. And so this becomes very important. And so when people start talking about why would Bantu with ancient Egyptian, because scholars have already recognized this connection. Matter of fact, how I even got on this path, because I was already studying ancient Egypt, but when I started studying Bantu philosophy, first starting off with Dr. Fukiao's work, I'm like, wait a minute. I see these same things in ancient Egyptian text. And so, it started a 20-year journey in research. And over these 20 years, I've been accumulating this data. And I've gotten to the point now where I can argue with anyone. You bring me your best scholar. chances are I've already had a conversation with them. You bring me your best scholar, and they will get eaten up with this information. And so I'm just going to leave this here for people who are going to come back and rewind. These are just the sound interchanges in the Egyptian language, and some of the source material that discusses these sound alternations. And these become very important when we're doing internal analysis of the ancient Egyptian language. And so, also when we're talking about the Sumerian languages, they also have a series of internal dialectical variations of particular sounds. And so I won't go through all these. These are just here for when you review this, you can pause and view for yourself. And of course, I have these in Alluja Volume 2. I have them in the towards Chicom dictionary text. All of that is in there. So this is the so-called modern Bantu language zone. And when we talk about when you do modern analysis of Bantu languages, they break them up into these zones. These zones, in many respects, are just arbitrary. They're not. They're not. They're not based on linguistics at all, or any kind of genetics. Is just a kind of a convenient way to kind of group the the so-called Bantu languages. And so you can see, some of the right hand side is where you see the Great Lakes. It is the J, D, and F languages that have the oldest archaic Bantu features and vocabulary, with the exception of Kikongo over here. But this is especially Zone J, is where you're going to find the oldest forms of the so-called Bantu languages. And this becomes very important, especially for the argument, the unscientific argument that Bantu started in Cameroon, Nigeria, which they have absolutely no proof of whatsoever. And when you get deep into a lot of linguistic studies, especially when it comes to Africa, you will find that there's a lot of conjecture and no proof. If you ask somebody for a
Mm-hmm. So where is the first born? Where is the first born? Um, it's so funny. It is. Okay, family. As you see, I was looking for this information about where the human race originated, and it points to the Great Lakes. This is where this brother Asar is lining things up as well, according to the languages. And then it's as if our people, went into different areas, start migrating towards, the Kemet area, the north east area. So I knew I heard of this before, but I never looked it up. So here we go. I just wanted to give an account of what I do see some are sharing in this manner.
Proof of Niger Congo or of Afro-Asiatic or that Bantu languages originated in southern Cameroon or in, I mean, northern Cameroon and Nigeria border. Watch the Harlem Shuffle that they're going to give you when you ask for that information. And believe me, I've been searching and asking for years. It's a situation where somebody of prestige presents a hypothesis and people just roll with it as if they have proved the hypothesis. And so, me being a scientist first, coming from a scientific background, a lot of stuff that goes on in a lot of Africanist literature just would not fly in any kind of scientific discourse. And it's just amazing how a lot of this stuff has been passed on as legitimate historical works. But that's a bit too deep for the moment. And again, if anybody has any opposition, bring me your teachers. Let me have the conversation with them live in public where I can ask them the critical questions. Anyway, so many times y'all have heard me deal with the concept of ma'at in the ancient Egyptian and other African languages. And so we're going to do this in a very unique way here today. And okay, I just wanted to make sure that that slide was there. So, as we know, that the word ma'at stands for truth, justice, reciprocity, equality, and order, rectitude as well. And this word that we're saying as ma'at is really not ma'at. That's just, based upon a transliteration system that we use when we are writing ancient Egyptian words for the computer. And so I don't know if y'all can see my mouse, but if you look towards the top here and you see these two graphemes right here, in order to write these two graphemes, because these are not on your computer screen, we use capital A for this grapheme here, and we use lowercase a for this grapheme here. And so what people have done is they've taken that capital A and lowercase a that we use to represent these graphemes that represent sounds that we don't have in English, and they have said mot, and it's not mot. That's not how you pronounce it. And so this sound here is actually a nasalized uvular trill, and this actually could be depending upon the vowel that preceded it, either like a dental in terms of like a D sound, or a velar, like how I have here in terms of this voiceless velar here, the K sound. So it's like merakit, merakut, or meradzi, or meradzit, you know. And so how it was exactly pronounced, we'll never know because we don't know the vowels. But understand that these are consonants and not vowels. So it's not mat. So when you understand, this is going to be very important when we're doing a systematic analysis, when we're trying to discover. And keep in mind that you won't find ma'at in Semitic languages. It doesn't exist. And so none of those groups that they allegedly had came over out of the Middle East and brought the culture and started ancient Egyptian, they didn't have no ma'at. But what I'm about to show you is that the ancient inherited this term from their pre-dialectical ancestor that they shared with the Bantu speakers. And they still worship Ma'at to this day. You go to Central Africa right now, and God is referred to as what we're saying is Ma'at. And I'm going to show you. And so, in another analysis, I show how Ma'at and Ra are essentially the same deity, just a masculine, feminine version of it. And these are just various different pronunciations that you will find in modern Bantu languages like Kalunga, Karunga, Mulungu, Murungu, Kalanga, Itango, Katanga, Intangu, Ilanga, for son and the word for God in these African languages. And so we know that Ma'at, again, is, order, harmony. A cognate for it in the Bassa language in Cameroon is Ibag, which means structuring, arranging, ordering, grouping together. Together harmoniously, order and structure again. And so we know from the text that Ma'at was thus more than only the principle of universal order. It was an integral part, an inseparable aspect of the cosmos, without which the cosmos would not have even existed. Essentially, what we're talking about here is that Ma'at is the universe itself. It is God. It's just another label. It's just a title for God. God has many names. God has many titles, and there's a way that you have to understand these names. It's just another word, just an aspect of God, but it's essentially the universe itself. And as we know, in the African milieu, existence is God. And so, what I want to share here, there's a book by Dr. Lyle Campbell, who's a linguist. Excuse me, there's an article by Dr. Lyle Campbell, who's a linguist, in the book, The Handbook of Historical Linguistics, which is edited by Brian D. Joseph and Richard D. Jonda. And so this is one of the reasons, and I think they talk about this, he's one of the major critics of Greenberg and his mass comparative method and the pseudoscience of Niger Congo, Nilo-Saharan, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. And in it's interesting because there's a book that's coming out by a lot of a number of linguists who had a conference recently talking about that they cannot establish a relationship with ancient Egyptian and Semitic. All European scholars reinforcing exactly what Theophilo Binga said in 1993. Actually, earlier, as early as 1974, and even in the 60s. So, but this he wrote an article, a chapter in this book here titled "How to Show Languages Are Related: Methods for Distant Genetic Relationship." So, what he says here is very important and critical to understand. So I'm going to go through this slowly. He states, while some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences. Let me pause here. The reason why this line is very important, again, he's challenging those people who are trying to do these super long comparisons, but only looking for words that sound alike in the long distance languages. And so we're talking about people who are doing stuff like Nostratic languages, and this kind of blend with Altaic and all this, and of course the phyla of Nilo-Saharan, Niger Congo, Afro-Asiatic, and Khoisan. And so what by doing the mass comparative method, what they do is they just basically is what we call lookership. Lookership, just looking for words that kind of sound, that look like they look similar to other words and have a similar meaning. And so this is just untenable in historical comparative linguistics. It's unscientific. And any results that come from that method produces unscientific results. And so this is why the whole Greenberg idea is thrown out the window for a lot of African scholars, because it's just unscientific, and it leads to these false results. And so I'll start over. While some sounds may stay relatively unchanged, many undergo changes which leave phonetically non-identical correspondences, meaning that some of the correspondences are not going to look like the words in which you're comparing. But you can only come to this conclusion by doing the comparative method, which is essentially the scientific method for linguistics, historical comparative linguistics, that is. He says, one wonders, this is why I have this in red, one wonders why correspondences that are not so similar are not more common in such proposals. Meaning, when they're making these arguments for these long distance, grouping these large phyla that's supposed to go back 20, 30, 40,000, 50,000 years, like with Niger Congo and all this, how come when they're doing the correspondences that there's not more correspondences that don't look alike? All the correspondences in which they show are words that look similar, which means that it's going to be a chance look-alike. That these are pseudo correspondences. And so we continue. The sound changes that lead to such non-identical correspondences often change cognate words so much that their cognacy is not apparent. These true but non-obvious cognates are missed by methods such as multilateral comparison. And I have in the brackets, aka mass comparison, the Greenbergian methodology, which seeks inspectional resemblances. In other words, lookership. And it's lookership without any kind of checks and balances to ensure that they don't have pseudo correspondences. And so I'll just give one example here. He says, for example, in the Hindi, this saka compares Sanskrit chakra and sing, Sanskrit sringa, are true cognates of the English word wheel and horn, respectively. Now, when you look at, I'm going to pause here. When you look at the word saka and you look at the word sakra, where you get the word chakra from, for all you yogai and chakra folks who be talking about your third eye and kundalini going up your chakras, you know that the word chakra just means wheel. So how does this Hindu word and this Sanskrit word saka and chakra, how is it cognate with the English word wheel? They don't look alike. They don't sound alike. Anybody who was doing lookership would say these words are not cognates. But through a series of sound meaning correspondences, we know that this is in fact the case. The reconstruction of the word for wheel in Indo-European is quequolo. And so what happened is there was some aspiration. The K in the center of this K here in the center, this rounded K, it became W intervocally. And when this K here, I'll take that back. This K became W. This K became aspirated. And so it became wheel. Whereas the E, this front vowel here, caused palatalization of this first sound here. So that's why it's cha or sa here in the Sanskrit, in the Hindu words. because of a palatalization because of this front vowel. If you don't know these things about, linguistics and sound change and the environments which motivate sound change, you won't know how the Proto-Indo-European word quiquolo becomes saka or chakra. And so he gives some other examples of how even the word five in English comes from Proto-Indo-European pinque. Pinque does not sound like five. However, looks can be deceiving. And this is why common sense, like, there's no such thing as common sense science. Common sense is antithesis to science because the universe continually tells us that things are not always as they seem. And so we have to have methods and instruments to be able to see reality for what it is. And that's what the comparative method allows for us to do so that we're not relying on inspections, or resemblances. So keep this in mind. I hope I explained this as simply enough as I could.